Hi, this lesson is going to talk about how to teach the Be Good People curriculum. And specifically, we're talking about the core edition, which is designed for Tier 1 school-wide instruction, and specifically content for the 9 through 12 grade band. And the reason why I'm starting here on the Be Good People curriculum webpage is because I wanted to talk about how there's three main ingredients, we call them, of Be Good People. And this is particularly important for middle and high school buildings because how middle and high school buildings typically manage their school-wide scope and sequence is they'll rotate between these three types of activities. So teacher input has driven that. It's not something I can take credit for, but really we found that not having a lesson every single week breaks things up. So we'll rotate between like a lesson one week and then, an extension activity, then some community building the next week. Changing that up is engaging for students and they enjoy that change in routine as far as what we're doing during advisory. So a lesson is going to be like our most formal ingredient. Although when we get into that, that's the first thing I'll get into, especially for 9 through 12. These are just significantly less formal and structured than they are for elementary, for example. Extension activities are, by and large, for high school students, most of these are going to be longer videos, like a TED Talk, for example, like 8 or 10 minutes. And they're broken up into chunks. So we'll have 90-second, 2-minute chunks of video broken up by discussion questions. So I would say that is probably the most frequent as far as like percentage of weeks. Like 50 to 60% of weeks in your typical high school schedule are going to be those videos broken up by discussion questions because they're just the most popular with students and teachers. And then community building, whereas the two things I just talked about, lessons and extension activities, they're learning focused, content focused, they're pointed at specific SEL benchmarks. Community building is just getting to know each other better. So we're just building relationships in community. So would you rather questions, icebreaker questions, games, etc. So with that explanation, like I said, I'm going to go through these lessons first, then an extension activity, then community building. So I'm going to click on 9 through 12, and I'm going to click on, let's see what would be a good demonstration. Let's check out being assertive. So like I just clicked on literally a random lesson. I'm going to talk about the features you see on this opening slide. So one thing you might have noticed first is that I clicked on being assertive, but the lesson slide says something else. So what it says, being assertive, and then you see skill in the bottom left corner, is what we call like a skill label. So it's helpful for me as an instructor and principals planning this out. Just calling a spade is what I like to say. Like, this is the skill we're getting at here. And for K all the way up through 12, you're going to see the same skill labels. So if kindergartners are ignoring distractions, seniors in high school can be ignoring distractions. It's the same thing. So we just have that consistent label. Obviously, things get more sophisticated, but it's just helpful to have that consistent label. But high schoolers don't tend to respond well if things are very preachy and overly directive. You're going to hear me say that a lot in this video. So instead of having that big prominent being assertive on the opening slide, we're generally going to have like a question. It's generally framed as a question, just something a little bit easier to open up to, like, do you stand up for yourself, or another reflection question. And then we have a little couple sentences that expound on that. So I might just read this and then I might expound on it a little bit if I'm feeling comfortable. But this is where I usually like to say, these are not scripts. So you're not walking around the classroom with a script and you're reading the bolded sentences in your lesson script. We're not trying to box you in like that. So there's enough on these slides where if you just, for whatever reason, just need to read what's up there and that's it, that's all you got that day, that is okay. I mean, that's what we're aiming for here, is just putting it on the slide so that it's there for you. But obviously it's more engaging and involved, and we hear from students consistently in student surveys that just like they can tell when people are adding to it and bringing their own things and adding things. They can tell when people are engaged on an instructional level, and they obviously respond well to that. So that's all I'll say about that. The bottom right corner, relationship skills, in this case, this is the standard. There's 5 SEL standards. So there's self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. So these learning badges for those 5 standards are in all elements of the curriculum. So they're a common thread, connective tissue that brings visually the continuity from lessons to extension activities to community building and week to week. Students see those familiar visuals that connect their topics. And in a little bit more detail down here is just that's the specific grade band benchmark for relationship skills that this lesson is linked to. And then finally, it's a lesson. It's down there in the bottom right corner, and it's from the core edition. So this just tells you what you're looking at. And then in the speaker notes, you're going to see a lesson to link to share feedback. We really appreciate that. These in particular, these high school lessons, from what they looked like when they were launched and first made available to the schools I work with to what they look like now is just could not be more different. So, 20, 30, 45, I don't even know, changes were made to the order of these slides, to the format of them. They're just night and day, completely different, but driven by high school teacher feedback. So we want to keep that rolling and make them always better. So please share feedback. A link to visit our website. So that takes you back here and you can access more materials. And then hear what's new. We always recommend that if not every teacher, at least a few instructional leaders are subscribed to our mailing list, because we do change the curriculum in response to feedback. And we want to let people know so that it doesn't catch people off guard. So we always recommend that at least a couple of folks are subscribed to that mailing list. And I run it. I don't spam people. We just send out every 2 weeks or every month or so during the school year. Whenever we have enough information to make it worth sending out an email, we send one. So before I move off this slide, I just wanted to mention, put it in present mode. So I'm looking at it from the, editor view, whatever you want to call it in Google Slides, but click slideshow and put it in full screen present mode before you present to students. And on slide 2, this is what I like to call an attention getter. So pretty much every lesson is going to have a short video here, 10 to 45 seconds roughly, and then a little reflection question. And this is really just to get students opening up. We don't want to dive deep into content right away and be preachy by any means. So we just play a video to get them talking, essentially. And it's mostly videos because those have been the most popular with teachers because they engage students the most. Sometimes it'll be a quote. Sometimes it'll be, from a famous person, a quote from a famous person. Sometimes it'll be a quote from an example student. And those are basically the 3 main things we're using at this point to be that attention getter. What you'll see here, this is a why slide or a rationale slide. We've had teacher feedback requesting really early in the lesson to talk about why this is important. And what we used to have, like I said, I'm going to keep talking about teacher feedback. We used to have something a little bit more directive and preachy here, and it was just saying like a couple of reasons why, what does this skill do for you? A couple reasons why it's important. And we got feedback that was too directive. So all that we have here at this point is a group of values, and we just invite students to say, what connections do you see between the topic we're discussing and any of these values? So what we're trying to get at here, and there's no wrong answer, is helping students to articulate their own personal values all the time. That's another piece of teacher feedback we got, specifically asking, can you create more opportunities in these materials for students to encounter different value vocabulary so that they can adopt that vocabulary and be better at articulating what their values are and reflecting on how their behavior does or doesn't match up with those values that they say are their values. So hopefully we're accomplishing a lot with a little here, and really all that we're asking is that question at the top, like when it comes to being assertive or asserting yourself, which of these values really matter to you? Do you see some connections between this topic and these values? What are they? And I handpicked these values specifically for every lesson. So take it from me, there's going to be some connection between this topic and any one of these on here. But like I said, no wrong answer. And before I move on, though, there's one thing I wanted to mention. One of the key pieces of feedback we hear from high school teachers about teaching these materials is that the more I open up and share personal experiences or my personal views, the more it engages students. And it's an opportunity for me to build trust and relationships with often the students in my advisory class. So not everybody, teachers are completely different levels of comfort with that, but that's one thing I wanted to mention because we do hear it a lot, is that, I have a good time when I have something to add and I can open up a little bit. Students really respond to that. And again, we hear that from students right back, that I can tell I really like it when my teacher is sharing. So where I was going with that is this slide would be a great one to say, one of my values that's really important to me is family. And my family, one thing that's really important to us, my wife and I, is giving each other feedback and being assertive with each other and being honest and letting each other know how we really feel, rather than just kind of rolling over and going along with things. We want each other to communicate with each other because that's really healthy. So anyway, bird walk there, but this is a really good slide for you to insert yourself and share something personal about yourself if you're comfortable doing so. This slide is really getting at prior knowledge. So again, teacher feedback, we used to have these scenarios all at the end of the lesson, but teacher feedback was that we want one of these scenarios early in the lesson to help stir the pot when students are thinking and sharing about their prior knowledge. So the bottom right corner where it says, what wisdom would you share with a younger person about this topic? That's really the core of what we're getting at with this slide. And the scenario and the how would you help Henry handle this situation, that's really just there to get people talking and stir the pot, to give some students something to bounce off of. Because previously we would just ask directly, what would you share? What wisdom would you share? What advice would you share with someone about this topic? And that was just asking for too much too quickly. So we needed to give students kind of an idea board, something to bounce off of to get their brains going. And another piece of teacher feedback, these are all written in third person. So we got some feedback that it's a lot easier for students to respond to, adolescents to respond to someone else's situation and talk about how that person should handle it versus saying, how would you handle it? It's a little bit more of a risk socially for them to step out and say like, well, I would do this. So again, we're just getting at prior knowledge. This slide, I'm glad I have this lesson open because this slide, you're not going to see something like this in every lesson, but this happens to be a table about what's passive versus assertive versus aggressive. And I don't like to talk over slides with so much text like this, so I would just let students read it and then talk. But another common piece of advice we hear from high school teachers is you don't have to be the content expert. So you might be a chemistry teacher who's been teaching organic chemistry or chemistry for 12, 13, 15 years. You might be the complete and utter expert, master of every question that comes at you about chemistry. So it's weird for 20 minutes of your week in advisory, be talking about something that you are not necessarily the expert at. That's kind of what we've heard from high school teachers. So they say to their colleagues, like, you just have to acknowledge that and be okay with it. And then they also say, like, you're a functioning adult, you're a teacher working in a school, you kind of are the expert. I mean, nobody's the complete perfect expert of these SEL skills, but you are an expert, relative to your students. You have a lot of life experience. So anyway, it's a really common piece of advice we hear is just, if you're looking at this and students are just like, well, what's the difference between passive and assertive? You just say like, I'm not sure exactly, like I usually don't put it this way or think about it this way, but let's figure it out like together. What do you think? So you don't have to be the expert. And what you will find in all the lessons is some tips. So just a little bit of extra, we got at the prior knowledge. Now we want to get to just like a little bit of advice. But again, here, I can't overstate enough. The feedback we've gotten from students and teachers in high school is, we don't want to be told what to do. Like, it's not preaching, it's inviting dialogue. It's supposed to be a meaningful conversation. I'm not, again, preaching at the student about the way that this has to look. And teachers who have had the best time with this keep repeating that their goal, they're okay when they disagree with students. They'd rather have them engaging and talking and sharing and thinking than shutting down. And if they, are overly directive and say like, it has to be this way, and pushing that onto students, that's the thing that suffocates the dialogue, and that's not what they want. They just want students to open up and talk. So with that said, we're just offering some tips, but I would be asking students, what do you think about this? Like, keep that critical thinking going in that analysis. Like, do you agree with this or not? Some of these are going to have static pictures, but we have tried to add GIFs or GIFs. I never know which way is right to say that, GIFs or GIFs, because again, teacher feedback, they want that like engaging visual element to pull students in. And then finally, we end on application. So it's just this choice board. I really like this choice board because we know the choices are really engaging for students or anybody, frankly. And there's 4 choices here for how to respond to this scenario. So play it out. So you could take kind of the things that have been said in class so far, these tips, just anything we've discussed, and say, what would that look like in this situation to play it out? Words of wisdom is kind of like if you could hit pause and give Christina some advice to help her navigate this situation, what would you say to her? Heads up, I think this is the easiest one personally to just access for kids. It's just saying what could go wrong, what should Christina try and not do in the situation. And then lessons learned is if students have any kind of scenario or situation they've been through that's even remotely similar to this one, it's letting them offer that and say, here's what I learned from it. And this is where I'm going to offer the third piece of feedback we always hear from high school teachers, is that think, pair, share, or other discussion techniques that break up whole group discussion. You don't have to just do whole group discussion. Think, pair, share, and other techniques that let students talk to a partner or somebody sitting next to them, and then maybe open it up to the whole group, are a very good tool in your toolbox for getting students talking. Because if we just do whole group discussion, there's a higher probability we're going to hear crickets. But again, it's just your group, which you're going to know best, especially if you have an advisory that you've worked with year after year. You'll know if they're going to get off topic pretty often during think, pair, share. Then you might have to do a different discussion technique. One thing I'll click on here, this is completely optional, but if you want to do an ink pair share, and give students an opportunity to write out their thoughts before they share them orally. And this isn't a replacement for discussion. We don't want to just throw student worksheets at students and have no dialogue around what we're talking about. But anyway, this is just something you could use if you wanted to frame that ink pair share. And there's 2 options. One, I think, puts a little bit more pressure on the students and is a little bit more gamification. There's 4 response options, and then there's 4 scenarios. So if students had this worksheet in front of them, this handout, if they picked heads up for the first scenario, well, that one's off limits. So they have to kind of be a little strategic about which one they're going to use for which scenarios, because they might, anyway, more gamification. But if you want to put less pressure on them, you could use this other variation, which just lets them circle and pick any of the response options for any scenario. And these are generic, so it's the same handout for any of these lessons. So that's kind of helpful from a logistical angle, because you could just print off a bunch of these at the beginning of the year and keep them in a file drawer and just use them whenever you're using one of these lessons where they fit. So you don't have to reprint them for, throughout the year. And then the final piece is this lesson complete slide. So it's meant to look like a level complete video game screen a little bit. And you'll see it repeats the learning badge from the beginning of the lesson. So we're just reflecting on what we learned about. In this case, it was relationship skills. And then those 4 values. And that's how I'd end it. That's kind of your typical lesson. And now I'm going to look at, again, extension activities. And I'm just going to repeat that lesson we just looked at. In most high school schedules, that's going to be like 15 to 20% of the weeks is going to be those lessons. And what is going to be probably a majority of your weeks is these extension activities, which, again, by far the most popular is these videos broken up by discussion questions. So I'm going to look at Michael Phelps. So this looks similar to what we just looked at, but there's just some key differences. One is that in the top right here, we're always going to have some graphics that show you what kind of content you're working with. So if you You're probably not going to be opening this up from the website day to day. You're probably going to be opening it up from a building schedule. So like a line on your spreadsheet that says, November 3rd, and then you click on Olympian Michael Phelps. You click that, it'll open here. So it's just helpful to know what am I getting myself into in the top right. So it's a video in this case and some discussion. So it kind of tells me what I'm going to be doing. And teachers have been very happy with these little length indicators here. So in total, across the whole thing, how long is the video? So for pacing purposes, if I have a 18-minute advisory and 5 minutes of video, that helps me know how long I have for discussion. And then this tells me how many chunks the video's in. So that's important. For not every single extension activity, but for ones that are about mental health or bullying, for example, we're going to have these things that help you, before you dive into it, give students a preface, which again, teachers have requested having something like this to have just one addressing of the issue before we get into it. So in this case, it's about mental health. So there's a video, it's marked part 1. It'll start and then stop on its own. So these are like 90-second, 2-minute clips, generally speaking, and then it just stops on its own, and to go to the discussion questions. And again, same thing I said before, as much, as your personal experience you're comfortable bringing to it, that tends to engage students. They tend to receive that really well. And then like think, pair, share, and other discussion techniques that break up the whole group discussion are great to leverage here. And then I'll repeat the same thing I said earlier about you don't have to be the content expert, especially when we get into these videos. They're going to talk about a variety of topics, and some of these discussion questions, you might be like, I'm not exactly sure, like the best answer to this. It's okay to not be the expert. And then when you get to the end, same thing, you're going to see complete and then a learning badge. And then finally, we'll look at community building. Like I said, these are not content focused. It's just activities to help us get to know each other better. So there's icebreakers, would you rathers, games, pretty paltry amount of games right now, but looking to grow. And then we just, we're going to add more games and things over time. But let's click on an icebreaker. What you're going to see is these are like question packs of 4. We call them packs. That's been received well by teachers because they'll say, we don't get through in an 18-minute or 20-minute advisory. We don't get through all 4 questions, but we like that because we have some choice. So if my students say we don't like this question so much, we can just move past it and get to another one. So 4 has been like the happy medium that folks like. So that's about what you'll find. And then at the end here, we have the same learning badges. So like I said, that common thread, that continuity between the materials is those learning badges. And that is about it. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope your students enjoy Be Good People, and I hope that you enjoy it. And thank you so much for your time. Have a wonderful day.